Next, we are gonna cover operable principle. It means as a user, I must have the freedom to choose any device, be it mouse, be it a keyboard, or be it a switch device. There are consumers who are dependent on text-to-speech softwares, wherein they give commands to interact with your application. For example, you might use Siri or Alexa. You might say, "Hey Siri, click on submit button, click on the accordion, open that hamburger menu." To ensure that it works properly, we have to work on the operable principles. The first one under operability is keyboard, and this is single A conformance level. All functionality on your web page must be available via a keyboard. So if you are having menus in your application, they should be keyboard operable. If you're having buttons, form fields, any interactive widget in your application, those should be triggered using a keyboard as well. How do you meet it? Ensure everything that you can navigate to using a keyboard is also actionable using a keyboard as well. What it means? You can use your tab keys to move forward to all the actionable and visible elements on the page, and press enter or spacebar keys to trigger the functionality. In case you are interacting with radio buttons, you must be able to use the left and right arrow keys to change the selection. And there are no exceptions in this case. Anything which can be used via a mouse should also be operable using a keyboard. Next, we have no keyboard traps. So while you are navigating using your keyboard, Sam, you are using tab keys. And if there is a point wherein you are not able to move past that element, that's called a keyboard trap. So for example, if you are tabbing through this form, you are on your first name and you tab again, your focus is not moving outside of this text field. That's called keyboard trap. Now, how do you meet it? Ensure that your focus can move in and out of all the elements using only keyboard commands. Now, there might be occasions where you say if you want to quit this field, use a shortcut key Control H or Control Tab. As long as that method works, you can excuse this success criteria. Having said that, there are exceptions. If you trigger a model, you might have seen a model which says, "Are you sure?" like confirmation models. In that case, you are required to keep that focus within that model. So that's intentional keyboard trap, so that user is not going beyond the model and tabbing through the other elements on the page. The next one we have is character key shortcuts. You might have used YouTube a lot. On YouTube, they have a functionality where you can mute or unmute the video by pressing a combination of two keys, Control plus M. This success criteria is completely satisfied there. It says that you are not dependent only on one single character keyboard shortcut, because those shortcuts could be reserved for screen readers. For example, pressing M might be reserved for some action. Pressing H is jumping from one heading to another. So whenever you are applying a functionality which requires more than one keyboard presses, always use Control plus the keyboard, Shift plus the key that you want the action to be performed. Browsers or screen readers, they are by default in the browse mode. Browse mode means you can press different keyboard shortcut keys like H for headings, U for unvisited links, R for regions. When you press those keys, they jump from one heading to another, one unvisited link to another, or one landmark to another. Now, when you use those keys for any other action that you want to perform, they will conflict with the functionality of a screen reader. In that case, use the combination of Control plus the key that you want it to perform the action. The only exception that we have is it is only applicable when there are character key shortcuts. Next, we have timing adjustable. Now, if there are models in your application, like the common example is session timeout. Now, if there is such functionality and there's a time limit, you should have the option to turn off that functionality, adjust it, or extend it at least 10 times. So if you are on a banking website and you have been there for more than 30 minutes, there will be a model saying your session is about to expire. you should have the capability within that function, within that application, to extend it at least 10 times. So how do you meet it? You provide mechanisms to disable it, adjust it, or extend the time. Now there are very critical exceptions under this. If that event is a real-time event, for example, you are in an auction, online auctions, in that case, you're not required to provide such functionality. In case you're taking an exam, this functionality will not be provided. And if by default, the session timeout is for more than 20 hours, you're not required to such functionalities. Next, we have pause, stop, or hide. If you recall in our previous success criteria under perceivable, we had audio only content. In that, if the audio is playing for more than 3 seconds, we should provide a mechanism to pause it or stop it. This is applicable for anything which is blinking, moving, or auto-updating on page load, which is doing for more than 5 seconds, Sam. We must provide a mechanism to pause, stop, or hide. So you might have seen a common example of carousels with these controls. You have pause or play in the center. So how do you meet it? Provide those mechanisms to stop or play anything which is moving for 5 seconds. Exceptions, as you can understand, animations that are essential to the functionality. For example, you submit an application and it is taking more than 5 seconds and there is a loading spinner on the page. Those are under exceptions. Then we have 3 flashes or below threshold. I believe you might have seen a Pokemon movie when it was released. Surprisingly, when that was released in the US, 250 kids had seizures because there was one scene in which they flashed the screen more than 3 times in that second, and that triggered seizures among 250 kids. So what it means that we should avoid content that flashes more than 3 times per second. How do you meet it? There are tools nowadays. In the modern world, we have tools called as PEAT. This tool identifies what is the threshold level. The exception is if you are displaying that flashing content at the top left or the bottom right, meaning that it is not in the center of the page, it is not within your eye lines. Usually, the safe one considered is less than 25% of the total area of visibility. In my opinion, always avoid going with flashing contents. The next one we have is bypass blocks. Let's take an example of a web page. You have home, about, social, and contact us on that. You are a keyboard only user. Now to go to the main content of the page, which is this section, you have to tab through all the elements again and again. Bypass blocks provides you the mechanism to skip past all of those. And how do you do that? By providing skip to main content as the first tabbable link on the page. So when you start tabbing, when you load a new page, you press tab, that should be the first actionable element on a page. And when you press enter, it should skip all the headers which are repeatable at the top, and your focus should be on the main content of the page. This is what the success criteria is all about, that a user must be able to skip the repeated content. How do you do that? Provide a skip to main content link at the top or make use of ARIA landmarks. ARIA landmarks are critical. There are different ARIA landmarks such as your banner, navigation, main, aside, complementary, content info. Now, what are the exceptions? If there are no repeated blocks of content across pages, or the repeated content is very small. For example, you might have applications which says previous and next button at the top. That's very minimal things to navigate through. The next one is page titled. Every web page must have a unique and meaningful title. The industry standard is to have unique name followed by your company name. Also, the expectation is that your page title should match the main heading of your page. So as per the success criteria, I have to use a title tag and pass the unique and descriptive name here. How do you meet it? Again, you use unique descriptive title tags for each page, and your title tag should be similar to the main heading of the page. Think about a screen reader user. If they have multiple tabs open and they're coming back to this page The very first thing that's getting announced is your page title. That's how a screen reader knows which page they are currently on. And there are no exceptions. Every single page must have a page title. Then we have focus order. The focus order should be logical. Usually it is top to bottom, left to right. So assuming everything on this page is tabbable, what would be our focus order? You begin with your logo. You go over all the menu items. You go through all the 4 boxes. Then you go on to the footer links. How do you meet it? Ensure that the tabbing order follows the visual and the logical reading order. Now, there might be occasions wherein you want to change the tabbing order, but ensure those custom components have logical focus order within that. It should never be zigzag. Okay, it should be logical. From coding perspective, always depend upon semantic HTMLs. And in case you're using tab index greater than 0, you are scaling yourself up for failure. Because the moment you give tab index more than 0, it breaks the entire tabbing order of your page. So you have to manually provide the tabbing sequence for every single actionable element. And there are no exceptions for focus order. Next we have is link purpose. Look at this text that I have, which says click here. For a visual user, this is still fine. They are having the right context. Like there is an image in the background and I'm asking you to click here. Think about a screen reader user. They are tabbing through the application and what they will hear is click here. In that case, we must provide links that are self-explanatory. The purpose of each link should be clear from the link text or context. So how do you meet it? Rather than saying click here, you can use ARIA label which says watch XYZ. And to make it more descriptive, provide the text itself which says watch XYZ. And again, there are no exceptions for this scenario. The next one is pointer gestures. Anything which is having complex gestures must also provide a simpler alternatives. Think about a person who has limited hand movements. A person who is only dependent upon a keyboard or a switch device. For them to zoom into this map is very challenging using their fingers. In that case, we must provide mechanisms such as buttons like zoom button with plus, zoom out with minus, and if they want to change the direction of the map, use up, down, left, right arrow keys. So this is how you provide alternatives for complex gestures which are solely dependent upon the touch. So how do you meet it? Always provide single tap or click alternatives for multi-point or path-based gestures. This is also applicable for draggable events like drag and drop. There is also a success criteria that we'll be discussing shortly. In terms of exceptions, if the gesture is essential, and this is commonly seen for mobile applications. The next one is pointer cancellation. It simply says, as a user, I must be able to cancel the action that I triggered by touch. Looking at this image that I have, if I'm using my mouse and if I click on this submit button, but I don't release the click, the left click, and if I move outside of this button and then release, it will not trigger the submit functionality. It only does that when I'm releasing my mouse, when my focus is still on the submit button. That's giving you the opportunity to cancel the action that you took. Alternatives would be to provide a model which says, are you sure? When it is very critical action that you're performing. So that's the simple definition of pointer cancellation. And how do you meet it? Do not fire actions on touch start. Always look for touch end. If you're using on-click event handlers, that's automatically taken care for you. You're not required to worry about touch ends. But if you're writing your own event handlers, handling a very complex scenario, that's where you're required to handle the touch end and not touch start. Now, what are the exceptions? You can use the down event if the user can easily undo or abort that action. That's where I said if you have a model which says, are you sure? That's an action, the second chance that you are providing to your user, the second line of defense in case you're using touch start event handlers. The next one we have is label in name. At the beginning of the session, I spoke about text to speech, right? Wherein you can give voice commands. Now, think about a scenario wherein a user says, click submit. Visually, it is a submit button. But what if the developer has given ARIA label as confirm? Now, confirm becomes the accessible name for this button, even though visually it is a submit. In this case, this action will not be triggered because behind the scenes, the developer has changed it to ARIA label. And this is what this success criteria is all about. Visible labels must match the accessible name. Visible label is different from accessible name. This is the right time to introduce you to accessibility trees. So I'm going to inspect sign in button. And the moment I click on this, you see this document object model with HTML rendered, all these details. Now, if I click on this icon, it will switch my view to accessibility tree. Now, before I explain what this is, you have document object model and then you have your screen reader. Screen reader never reads directly from your document object model. There is a layer in between and that layer is called accessibility tree. Accessibility tree reads your DOM and then generates it. In simple terms, accessibility tree holds three main values: name, role, and value. Every element that is rendered in your DOM must have these three things. If they provide these three things, only then a screen reader will be able to announce it. Let's take an example of this button. Under this, go to accessibility. Now look at these details. You see name, which says sign in. How it derived its name? Because there is an ARIA label sign in. What is the role? Role is the button. If there would have been any state like pressed or expanded or collapsed, there would have been a value field here as well. If it was a checkbox, it would say checked or unchecked, selected or unselected. Let's say this. This is a checkbox. It says remember me. This is my name. What is my role? Checkbox. Checked is true or false. So we have name, role, and value. Screen reader will announce name first. Then what is its role? Checkbox, right? Then it will say checked or unchecked. This is why it is critical to understand what is an accessibility tree. Moving back to our slide deck. So how do you meet it? Ensure that the voice input users can also activate controls using visible labels. Simply saying, if they're giving a command saying click submit, it should trigger that functionality. And again, there are no exceptions to this. This success criteria is specific to mobiles only. When you are building a responsive application and you are testing it on the mobile viewports. You might have seen when you are typing, depending upon the phone that you have, and if you have set those features on, when you type something and accidentally shake your phone, there will be a pop-up which says, do you want to undo it? That's actually dependent upon motion actuation. And in such situations, we must provide a mechanism or an alternative which is not dependent on motion actuation only. So we should have mechanisms such as undo or redo buttons. In simple terms, you should never depend on anything which is activated using motion only. So always make use of buttons or switches if that device provides. Now the exceptions are if that motion is essential. Again, coming back to the gaming example. In racing games, right, you have to tilt your phone on occasions. Even though they provide buttons, but certain features like you can, depending upon how you want to experience it, right? So you use those are under exceptions. The next one is dragging movements, and this is something which was recently introduced in WCAG 2.2. This says, in simple terms, is that we must provide alternatives to dragging. And this is for people with limited hand movements or having issues with precision dragging and dropping elements from one group to another. So what you can provide alternative is provide keyboard accessible solutions, wherein a user can tab into group A and then tab again using the keyboard key. Select the item 6 by pressing the space bar. Again press tab, go to the right arrow key and press enter. And that's how it moves from one group to another. Everything must be keyboard operatable. Exceptions if dragging is again essential and cannot be replaced. Commonly seen with editing softwares. Then we have touch target size. And this is again a recent advancement that WCAG 2.2 has, wherein they have defined that the minimum touch target must be at least 24 by 24 CSS pixels. And what do I meant by that? If I have a chat icon button, that should be 24 by 24 in size. If I have a submit action button, that should be 24 by 24. Now, there are certain exceptions that I want to share with you. The exception says equivalent control. So, for example, if you have my cart button on a page, which is an icon, if that icon is smaller than 24 by 24, but an equivalent button is present on the same page, like my cart bigger button, even then you will mark it as pass. I have different opinions about this, because why would you want your consumer to go to the top of the page or to some other place to trigger that functionality? Why don't make it 24 by 24 for everything? The other exception that they have is if the icon size is way smaller than 24 by 24, but the surrounding area, this entire circle area is 24 by 24. If you trigger that functionality by clicking here and it works, that's also under exception. You will say it is pass. Again, I have different opinions about this. I don't completely agree with what they are proposing. The other simple exception that makes sense is when you're having inline links. So you have paragraph, and within that paragraph, you have learn more or a hyperlink within that. In that case, you're not required to have 24 by 24. Or when you are not using your own CSS and are dependent on the browser itself. In those situations, you're not required to provide 24 by 24. And lastly, when the functionality is essential, commonly seen with Google Maps or any maps that you use. If you search for best Indian cuisine in your location, there will be hundreds. It's very critical to pinpoint the accuracy of those location pins, right? If you make it at least 24 by 24, it will not solve the purpose, right? So those are under exceptions. Then we have multiple ways. As a user, I should be provided with more than one way to locate a page. So for example, we have 4 different pages on this application. I should not be only dependent on the top menu. There should be alternatives such as sitemap, a search text box where I can search for social, and it should provide mechanism to go to the same page, not only dependent on the top navigation. So it says there should be more than one way to locate the same page within the application. How do you do it? Provide search functionality or provide sitemaps or consistent navigation, which means you are having it at the top and at the bottom as well. So you might have seen footer section. Let's take an example of Nike, right? Nike has the main menu. Go and check out their footer section. They have everything that they have listed in the main menu at the footer section as well. They also provide search functionality too. So under exceptions, if it's a single page application, there are no multiple pages within the application, or it's a very linear process, like you select something, you go to the next page and it ends. So in that case, you're not required to have multiple ways satisfied. The next one is pretty easy. It says we need to provide clear and descriptive headings and labels. If your headings and labels are not clear, it doesn't make sense for people with cognitive disabilities. Even though regular people, right, if you're not providing clear context using your headings and labels, it's very challenging to fill up the application. So how do you meet it? Headings that are descriptive, provide those. Use form labels that are descriptive, helping the user understand what you are asking from them. The first example that you have, it says name, whether it's first name or last name, or whether it's full name. That clarity must be provided using your labels description itself. And again, no exceptions for this success criteria. The next one is focus visible. So when you are tabbing through your form elements, right, be it buttons, regular form elements, there should be an enhanced focus ring around it. The example that I have, this is my regular state, submit. The moment I put focus on it, you see this blue border around it. That's an enhanced focus state. Look at the link in the footer section. You see this box around it? That's called focus visible. That gives clarity where my focus is currently on the page. How do you meet it? Ensure that there is an outline, visible outline, or sometimes you can use drop shadow. Avoid removing focus styles. They are necessary. The next one is keyboard, and this is under no exceptions. Everything must work using keyboard only. With that, we are done with principal operable. The next one we have is understandable. Understandable means as a user, I must be able to understand the application that is built using simple language. There must be a mechanism to prevent errors in the first place. And if the errors have occurred, there should be mechanisms to resolve those errors. There should be consistency throughout the application. If I'm using a menu at the top right side, it should stay in the top right position on every single page. With that, let's begin and go to the first success criteria, and that's language of a page. If your application is built in English and you're accessing this application any other language speaking like Germany, like be it Mexico or Germany, how will a screen reader know whether to announce the page in English or Germany? That's dependent upon the language attribute that you provide at the HTML level. So EN is a 2-letter code for English. So you are providing enough knowledge, enough data to your screen reader to announce it in the correct language. So this is what it calls language of page, that you should define the main language of that document or a web page. And always go with the 2-letter codes, because support for 2-letter codes is universal. If you write English, it might work on certain browsers, but it might break on others. Now, there might be occasions you want to use EN-US for US specific slang. If you are in UK, you can say EN-UK. Similar to language of page, we have language of parts. Look at my footer section. I'm having overall my page is in English, but in the footer section, I have different languages. To let the screen reader announce it in the right pronunciation, we must provide language attribute at the element level. Only for elements which are having different language being used. Now there are exceptions when those words are not commonly known or when it changes the meaning of the entire section. So for example, hola, gracias, tortillas, those are very commonly known words. So those are baked into assistive technology screen readers to understand and pronunciate in the right way. But if there are complex, there are lines, right? You have lengthy lines. In those cases, you are required. But as a best practice, always provide language attribute, which is different from the natural language of the page. The next one is on focus. On focus means that there should not be any change of context when you're moving from one element to another. Now, what is change of context? It means moving a user to a new tab or a new window. If putting a focus on first name text box scrolls to the different part of the page, that's change of context. If it puts my focus on submit by itself, I didn't press enter or spacebar key. I'm simply tabbing through the form controls, but it is putting focus on another element. That's called on focus, change of context. Or if it changes the meaning of the page entirely, it shows something else on the page. That's called change of context. And that must not happen when you are tabbing through it. So how do you meet it? Avoid auto navigation or opening up of dialogues when you're simply putting focus on an element. Upon user action, like pressing enter or spacebar key, definitely. If there is a linked functionality that opens up a model, definitely open it. But not simply putting a focus on an element should trigger it. And there are no exceptions for on focus. Similar to on focus, we have on input. If you have started typing in the first name text box field, it should not also trigger change of context. Same thing that we discussed in the previous success criteria. It must not trigger change of context when you are writing or inputting data. Use submit buttons, and again, there are no exceptions for this. The next one is consistent navigation. In case you have a multi-page application and you're providing navigation links, they must be provided in the same order across your application. So if you have menu item at the top right, it should always be in the top right. Not only from the CSS standpoint, but from the coding standpoint as well. Remember, screen readers are not dependent upon your CSS. They are dependent upon your markup. So if you have coded HTML's home page, home link at the beginning, it will be announced first. Even though if you use CSS to drag it at the end of the contact us, it depends upon the order in which you have coded. Put your HTML tags in the right order. How do you meet it? Place main tags, footers consistently across your pages. And this is another example of good user experience. Don't do it because it's WCAG. Do it to keep your users on your applications. Any application which is inconsistent, there's a high tendency of users leaving your website because it is adding extra burden on them to remember every time they visit your website. The only exception that we have, if it's a one page or a single page application, commonly with surveys, then we have consistent identification. So if you have a submit button which is submitting this form, right? Submit functionality should be consistent throughout the application. It should always submit a form. It should not toggle the visibility of any other element on the page. Similarly, if you're having a search button in your page, a search text box, it should always perform a search functionality and nothing else. That's called consistent identification. So how do you meet it? Use same labels or roles for repeated actions like search, link, or buttons. The exceptions would be if you are using a check mark. So a check mark can be used for approved or completed or included. As long as you're providing the right context along with it, saying approved, completed text with it, using ARIA labels if you want to, as long as you're doing that, it is completely fine. The next one is error identifications. A user must be informed when an error occurs on the page. And this is true for both people who can visually see the screen and people who are dependent on screen readers. As soon as it appears, it must be announced and shown. The best practice is always to display near the input field which has the error. This is necessary for people who are using zoom in softwares. If you're displaying this error message somewhere before the form begins, they will not be able to identify where that error is. There are no exceptions for error identification. The next one is labels or instructions. If you're having a text field which says it's a required field, right? You should mark it with star and define what that star means. And if you require that input in a certain format, you should provide those details called as instructions on the same form itself. So how do you meet it? Always use label tags and link that label with the text box. I would say avoid making use of placeholders because the moment you start typing, that placeholder text goes away. Always make a good practice of using helper text which are visually available on the page. There are no exceptions for labels or instructions. The next one is error suggestions. Error suggestion means if there is an error, that error must be self-explanatory. It should be enabling the user to correct the error that has happened on the page. So rather than giving codes like 101, 303, some garbage value with the errors, define what that error is. Saying please provide your first name or that username has been already taken. So provide clarity, provide suggestions within the error itself. I believe it's pretty clear. How do you meet it? You need to provide descriptive error messages. Exceptions when those errors are not clear, like you don't know what to suggest. For example, you might have seen websites wherein you are trying to create a new username and password. Even though you have tried multiple usernames, it's not accepting it. It simply says username already taken. In that case, it cannot suggest you unless you might have seen modern application which says try Sam_123, Sam_Nike_1, right? So unless that's also vague, right? That's not accurate. So those are under exceptions. So moving on, we have error prevention. And this is very critical when it comes to legal, finance, or data related. What it means, if there is a transaction happening, if there is a form field which requires legal information or anything related to finance. So whenever you are making a payment to an external account or to your own banking account, opportunity to review what information you have provided. This is where error prevention is critical, wherein you're preventing the errors to happen beforehand. From accessibility standpoint or from WCAG standpoint, this is only applicable for legal, finance, or data related. Exceptions applies to legal, financial, or data modifying transactions only. Now, data modifying is you're changing your password as well, but that's under exception. Okay, that's if that's not having confirmation, you should mark it as pass because that's under exceptions. With that, we are done with all the success criteria under understandable. The very first success criteria is name, role, and value. And I believe we briefly touched about it in our previous principle. Every element that is rendered in the DOM have three things: name, role, and value. Taking an example of this menu item, you have home as the accessible name, you have role, which is link, and then you have state, which is value is collapsed. Similarly, for this confirm button, you have accessible name as confirm, role as button. Value is not needed because there is no state linked with it. How do you meet it? First of all, use ARIA correctly if you want to provide accessible names using ARIA labels. If you are only using HTML tags, that's the best approach. But there are occasions that you will discover later in the sessions that requires use of ARIA attributes. The next one is status messages. This is something that we discussed when we were talking about the error messages on the page. When they appear, they must be announced, right? And how do you do that? Using ARIA live regions. It makes the announcements when the error occurs on the page. Exceptions only required for messages that do not take the focus away. If you're moving the focus away, then you're not required to make that announcement.